In 1900, John D. Rockefeller was the richest man alive. He controlled more wealth than 2% of the entire United States economy. He owned railroads, oil fields, and banks. He had more money than most countries on Earth. And yet, when he developed kidney disease, his doctors had nothing to give him. No antibiotics, no modern diagnostics, no surgical options. He sat in a mansion with gold-plated fixtures, suffering from conditions that a $40 prescription fixes today. He died having never once experienced air conditioning, a commercial flight, or a video call with his grandchildren. The richest human being of his era lived and died in a world most people reading this would refuse to accept as comfortable. That is the paradox sitting at the center of this video, and once it clicks, the way money is thought about changes forever. The standard comparison people use when measuring wealth is horizontal, comparing one person to another person alive at the same time. The billionaire versus the minimum wage worker, the hedge fund manager versus the school teacher. That comparison tells one story, but there is a second comparison almost no one makes, and it is the one that actually matters, the vertical comparison, the comparison across time. Pull that lens back far enough and something extraordinary comes into focus. In 1800, the global average life expectancy was 29 years. Not because people aged faster, but because child mortality was so catastrophic that it dragged the average into the floor. If a child made it to age 5, they might live to 50, but half of all children did not make it to 5. Wealthy families buried children like seasons change, routine, expected. Grief so common it barely registered in personal letters. Queen Anne of Britain had 17 pregnancies. Not one of her children survived her. She was one of the most powerful, well-resourced women on the planet, and the biological reality of 1700 did not care. Fast forward to today. In high-income countries, the child mortality rate has dropped by over 99% compared to pre-industrial levels. The medical knowledge, the sanitation infrastructure, the vaccinations, none of this existed for the aristocracy of previous centuries. None of it was purchasable at any price. It simply did not exist. This is what economists call the consumption frontier. The things that money can buy are not static across history. They expand. Every generation inherits a slightly larger menu of purchasable human experiences, and right now, in this precise moment of history, that menu is the largest that it has ever been. Consider what $100,000 in liquid savings actually buys in 2026 that no amount of wealth could have purchased at any prior point in history. It buys same-day flights to any continent. A person in London can wake up, decide to be in Tokyo, and physically arrive there before the week is out, something that would have required months of oceanic sailing and real mortal risk 200 years ago. It buys access to the collective knowledge of every university library on Earth, available through a pocket-sized device for less than the cost of a single candle per day. It buys medication that controls previously fatal infections with a 10-day course. It buys video communication with anyone on Earth in real time at effectively zero cost. It buys food from cultures that would have taken a lifetime of travel to taste. It buys temperature-controlled environments in climates that would have killed unprotected people just generations ago. None of these are billionaire luxuries. These are middle-class realities of 2026. Now zoom in on the financial architecture specifically, because this is where the argument becomes particularly striking. For most of human history, wealth was preserved through physical assets: land, gold, livestock, grain. These were hard to transport, easy to steal, and impossible to grow exponentially without extraordinary luck or extraordinary violence. The wealthy of medieval Europe kept their fortunes in castles surrounded by armed men. Even a century ago, a middle-class family's savings were largely trapped: low-interest bank accounts, physical property, or government bonds. The idea of a school teacher building a retirement portfolio that outperformed inflation through the stock market would have been laughable, because the mechanisms to do so simply did not exist in accessible form.
Index funds, the single most powerful wealth-building tool available to ordinary people, did not exist until 1976. The first one was created by John Bogle, dismissed by Wall Street insiders as Bogle's folly and predicted to fail within months. Today, index funds have turned millions of ordinary workers into millionaires by retirement. The arithmetic is almost absurdly simple. A 22-year-old investing $400 a month into a diversified index fund, earning the historical average return of around 10% annually, will have approximately $2.5 million by age 65. No stock-picking skill required. No inherited wealth. No connections. Just time and access. Two things that for the first time in history are genuinely available to working-class people in developed economies. This has never happened before. In no prior era could a factory worker expect to die wealthier than the merchant class of their grandfather's generation purely through consistent, passive investment behavior. The healthcare dimension of modern wealth is so enormous it rarely gets the attention it deserves in financial conversations. Medical bankruptcy remains a genuine concern in countries without universal healthcare systems. That tension is real and cannot be glossed over. But even within that broken system, the baseline of what money can purchase in terms of survival has expanded beyond imagination. In 1980, an HIV diagnosis was a death sentence. Today, antiretroviral therapy has transformed it into a manageable chronic condition. A person diagnosed with certain cancers in 2026 has treatment options that would have been classified as science fiction in 1990. Organ transplants, joint replacements, laser eye surgery, psychiatric medication, neurosurgical interventions. The purchasing power of money in the medical domain has expanded to include experiences that were previously not purchasable at any price because they did not exist. The billionaire of 1920 could not buy a bypass surgery. The middle-income earner of 2026 can. That is a seismic, historic shift in what financial security actually means for a human body. Technology has flattened the entertainment and information gap in ways that have no historical precedent. In 1900, attending a live symphony performance was a luxury available only to those in certain cities with the money for premium tickets. Today, every major symphony on Earth, every museum, every academic lecture series, every masterwork of world literature, every great film ever made, all of it is accessible to anyone with an internet connection at a library card. The experiential gap between a billionaire in 1920 and a person earning $30,000 a year in a developed country has never been smaller. Not because the billionaire has less, but because the baseline for everyone has risen so dramatically that certain categories of human experience have effectively been democratized.
A person earning $50,000 a year in Canada in 2026 has access to more music, more storytelling, more educational content, more global cuisine, more travel options, and more healthcare than Louis XIV of France. A man who ruled the most powerful nation in Europe was surrounded by thousands of servants and still died from gangrene because no one around him understood basic antiseptic practice. None of this erases inequality. Inequality is real, documented, and in many countries growing. The distance between the wealthiest and the most financially precarious members of society carries genuine moral weight. Millions of people in the world still lack clean water, reliable food security, and basic medical access. The argument here is not that everything is fine. The argument is more precise than that. The argument is that the floor has risen. The floor of what it means to have modest financial stability in a developed economy in 2026 is historically extraordinary. The floor of what modest income allows a person to experience, to learn, to eat, to do, to see, to survive, that floor is higher than the ceiling was for most of human history. And that creates a responsibility that rarely gets named, the responsibility to actually notice it. Every generation has its share of real problems. Every era carries its genuine anxieties. Financial stress is not imaginary. It is concrete, measurable, and painful. But beneath all of it runs something worth acknowledging, something that changes the texture of every financial decision once it is seen clearly. The era being lived in right now, with all its fractures and failures and inequalities, is, by any objective historical measure, the most resource-rich, medically advanced, experientially abundant moment in the entire span of human civilization. The only question worth sitting with is what gets done with it.